then we'll take it from there. So as we begin the conversation, let me first introduce the Schuylkill Center to you, as some of you, including our gentleman from upstate New York, might be new to the Schuylkill Center. So I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. Here we go. There we go. Hope you can all see that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me get to the correct view. There we go. So tonight we're talking about bees. There we go. It jumped ahead on me.
Oh.
There we go. Next week, Norris, speaking about COVID, next week we have a researcher from Bucknell University who does research on bats. She's a bat biologist, and she'll be talking about the connection between bats and COVID. So bats are likely the animal that the coronavirus jumped from. There may have been an intermediate host, but nonetheless, the virus jumped from bats to people in one of those famous wet markets, likely in Wuhan, as Norris mentioned, or it went from a bat to an intermediate host, then to people. So she's in Bucknell. She got a grant from the National Science Foundation to study the coronavirus family tree in the guts of all the bats that she has in her collection, several hundred different kinds of bats. So she's going to try to construct a family tree of the coronavirus. And the interesting question is, bats are loaded with coronaviruses, but they're not impacted by it. So they can do their bat thing without being touched by COVID. And so she's going to explain that with us next week. So that's next week. And then the week after, on the 24th, we had an Earth Day show scheduled for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day way back in April 22nd. Remember April? And so it was to have been the 50th anniversary of 1970's Earth Day. We had 6 artists responding to it. We pushed that down the road. And so it opens on the 21st, and you can come see it in our art gallery. And then the reception is in 2 weeks. And we have additional programs coming up on Thursdays. Check our website. Like I said, you can come to our Nature Center's art gallery and see Eco-Tactical, the art exhibition, starting the 21st. But the good news is we're open. So the visitor center actually closed on March 14th, a Saturday, 6 months ago. Would never have guessed it would take us 6 months to reopen, but the visitor center opened on the 8th. So you can actually come. There are lots of measures in place. There is sanitizer available. We are asking people to wear masks. We're limiting the number of people in rooms, but nonetheless, the visitor center is open. Our trails have been open this whole time, and lots of people have taken advantage of that, but now the visitor center is open as well. We do lots of different programming across the organization. We have a nature preschool where the kids spend copious amounts of time in the outdoors. Nature preschool actually opens their session next week. So we have 3, 4, 5-year-olds who will be masked and outdoors. And so we're going to use outdoors as kind of our secret weapon in a way to keep school going. So our kids are actually going to be coming to school. And that's next week. But we have a nature preschool for 3, 4, 5-year-olds. And actually the preschool ages up into a kindergarten. We also do environmental education programming across all ages, from little kids all the way up. We have a great after-school program where kids come play with us in the outdoors. We do public programming like this for adults. We're still trying to figure out when we're going to do in-person public programming, which we hope to start as we move through this. But for the moment, we're keeping most of it virtual. We have a wildlife clinic, which right now is buried in baby squirrels. It's the only wildlife clinic in the city of Philadelphia, treating several thousand animals from like 150 different species. That's a red-tailed hawk that Cris, the director of the clinic, is giving some moisture to. So there's a red-tailed hawk. And we have, as I mentioned, Eco-Tactical is a piece of our environmental art exhibition, which does indoor and outdoor shows. So we have the most ambitious art program of any nature center in America at the moment. So we're really proud of our art program. And we do lots of restoration work, like helping the Philadelphia Fanatic plant trees. So we're looking for opportunities to re-invite you back to the property to help us with the stewardship work that we do. We're a membership-based organization. If you're a member, you get exclusive notice to our programs. Hope you'll join. Some of you are members. If you're a member, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And on our website, we got rocked by this June 3rd storm, a derecho. We had this wonderful, derecho is kind of a superstorm, almost
Oh,
like a sideways tornado, and it just rolled through and took out this giant swath of pine trees in a grove of pines. So we have a campaign to
oh,
restore our pine grove. So if you're so inclined, you can find that easily on our website, schuylkillcenter.org as well. But we're looking for help with that. So it took out like 20 pine trees. It was a nightmare. We're still actually cleaning up. And we've had a couple of storms since then as well. But tonight we're talking bees. And so I will stop sharing. And again, I'm grateful that you're all here. There's a bunch of people in the waiting room. I think Amanda got kicked out. So Amanda was helping us admit people. She got kicked out. And so hopefully we'll fix that. Amanda, you back with us? Where's Amanda in the tiles? There you are. All right. So Amanda's back. So she has technical issues. Obviously, I'm no help to her. But if you have technical issues, try to find Amanda and see what you can do. People are chatting already. That's great. All right. All right. So pardon the hiccup. Okay. So back to tonight. So tonight we're doing bee basics, honeybees and beekeeping. It's brought to you by the Philadelphia Beekeepers Guild. It's a group that works to encourage and promote urban beekeeping through fellowship and education, and to raise awareness of the importance of bees to a sustainable environment. Monthly meetings are open to the public, and speakers present information on beekeeping and related topics like native pollinators and plantings and practices that encourage and sustain them. The Guild offers a short course as an introduction to beekeeping, has a membership program in their apiary. They have a certified honey kitchen for extracting honey, rental space in the apiary, and their fall honey fest is starting right now. So you can join in. They'll tell us about that in a minute. We have two guests from the Guild. Cris Larson is the Guild Secretary and a beekeeper since 2015, a retired teacher of environmental humanities, and is now working on a project with plants therapeutic to bees, medicinal to people, and helpful to pollinators. Hey, welcome, Cris.
well,
So glad you're
hey,
here.
good to be here.
And just a quick question for you before we go to Norris. What attracted you about becoming a beekeeper back in the day? Only a few years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. I taught, environmental humanities for so long, and I was, into the philosophy and the history of, man's relationship to nature, and I just really wanted to do something hands-on, and I fell in love with it because you can really get a sense of the workings of nature. You have to be attuned to the seasons. It's intense. Plus, I wanted the wax because I have done encaustic painting. So there were a lot of reasons. Most people's reasons for becoming beekeepers are pretty complex. Um, but we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that. That's great. Thank you. And then our second guest is Norris Childs. Norris is the Guild's vice president, a retired Navy captain and trauma surgeon, a Peace Corps volunteer back in the 60s, and a lifelong beekeeper. He organized the Guild's 2020 symposium and gave a presentation on viruses and bees. Norris, next year marks your 40th anniversary of being a beekeeper. What have bees taught you in 40 years? I'm curious.
They've taught me a lot of things about hard work. And since they're all girls, it's always a pleasure to work with them. Um, it's taught me about organization and discipline and kind of the importance of seasonal activities in farming. I was an agricultural volunteer in the Peace Corps, and that was kind of my intro to agriculture and farming. And the guy who I worked with in India was in fact a real farmer from Missouri. When I went to his birthday party at age 40, I think he was 40, he had this big box of bugs out behind his house near a tree. I looked at this, I said, "What is that box with all the bugs coming out of it?" He said, "Oh, that's a beehive." I said, "Well, really? What do you do with it?" And he said, "Oh, you get honey from it." And a light went off in my head, and I thought, really? Is it hard to do? He said, no, it's really easy. You just get the bees from here. You get the box from there. You put the bees in the box. They do all the work, and you just take the honey twice a year. I thought that sounds like my kind of work. So that's what I did. And I've learned about organization and about meticulous attention to detail. I've also learned that no matter what we do, the bees are going to get through it. They were around before the dinosaurs. They survived the dinosaur extinction. So they're going to survive basically anything that we do to them, which has always been enlightening to me.
One hopes. So Norris and Cris, I want to thank you for being with us. Really appreciate it. They're going to show us a short slideshow to kind of whet our appetite. And as they're doing that, feel free to begin putting questions for them in chat, or just watch the show for a minute or two, and then we'll come back to a conversation among the three of us that includes all of you. So Cris, you can share your screen now and take it away. So glad you're both doing this. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we designed these bee basics for people who are thinking of possibly starting beekeeping. Are you seeing this screen sharing?
We are. It's good.
Okay, and so well, the first question one would ask is, why keep bees at all? And people generally think of the products of the hive, which, for example, honey products, wax, things you can make with wax, propolis, mead. You can even get into apitherapy, as Norris mentioned. It's as a hobby, you can do it as a business for profit. You're not going to get rich, but you can make some money. A lot of people these days think about it in terms of environmental stewardship, but we'll get into that in more detail later on. And I tend to think it's really compelling because it does make you feel closer to the natural world. Of course, everybody has their own set of reasons for beekeeping, and we'll go through that hopefully as the talk wears on. People will start to think about what their motivations are. To check.
Let me add something to that,
Yeah,
Cris. That first slide, that is my daughter and my granddaughter who are doing the bee work there. So it's also a family connection thing, which is really good.
Yeah, that is true. That's true. My son helped me at one point. It's really fun that way. But there are things you want to check out before starting. Luckily in Philadelphia has been designated a bee-friendly city. They passed an ordinance back, I believe, in 2016. You will have to register with the state in Pennsylvania. I believe the surrounding counties do not have restrictions. New Jersey passed some restrictions that are kind of annoying to people. So if you're in New Jersey, you should really check those. If you're thinking about starting beekeeping, you should probably check with your neighbors. It's not likely you're going to run into that much opposition, but we'll talk about where to site hives to avoid any real problems. And if push comes to shove, you can offer them honey, and that usually solves all the problems. If you want to start hives in your site, there are a number of things you should consider. I mean, do you have a water source? Is it sunny? Are there any kinds of barriers that you need to consider? If you don't have space and you still want to do it, you may be able to find a local community garden, or the guild actually has rental spaces in the apiary that's up at Aubrey Arboretum. So there's usually a way around it if you're really interested in starting up or trying. I'd suggest actually volunteering somewhere or taking courses before you even start, because it's good to be more familiar before you really dig in. And some of the things you should really be familiar with are what bees actually do, what they are, how they behave. And one thing to think about is that what you're really dealing with is a superorganism. A lot of people are surprised to learn that the colony maintains a core temperature of about 91 degrees, and that's all year long. In the summertime, they tend to cool the hive down, and in the wintertime, they will maintain that temperature inside the hive. You can actually go out and feel it in the wintertime in your hive. And, it's one way people check to make sure their colony is surviving in the wintertime by, taking the temperature. a colony, the bees are actually acutely aware of their environment. I mean, I'm sure many people have heard of the bee dance, where the forager bees will go out and find a source of forage or pollen or nectar. They'll come back to the hive and they will communicate, and they will share the hives and resources, and that's the source of their strength. One interesting aspect is that the colony as a group is highly intelligent and adaptable, although a single individual bee is not. What you're talking about is emergent emergence, because where the cumulative behavior of all the individuals makes it this intelligent, adaptable, resilient entity. Think about this: any individual member of the superorganism will sacrifice itself. That's why we get stung. And no individual member of the colony can survive without the rest of the colony. So you're really talking about something that's, completely opposite of the American pioneer spirit. They all work together, and are not rugged individualists. They really do work together. Things to know about bees: there are 3 kinds of castes. You have the workers, the small one. To the left is the worker. Of course, there's the drone that can be identified by the huge eyes and the big rounded, the rounded thorax. The queen is identifiable. This queen has been marked, but she has, a smaller head than the drone. But you're going to notice her abdomen right there, and because that is full of all the eggs that will be laid to reproduce the hive. And here are some of the roles of these bee castes. The workers, they are indeed all female, every last one of them. They do all the work. Think of that. They will die after stinging. In the summertime, they live from 4 to 6 weeks, and in the wintertime, they will live much longer, from 4 to 6 months, to get through the winter. This is made possible because their physiology actually changes. In the late summer, they will start to accumulate fat bodies so that it changes, what these beings are, so they can actually live and then start the hive up back in the winter. The drones, all male, they live to mate with the queen. They don't sting. They live about 60 days, and they get pushed out by the workers in winter. I know someone who puts forth the actual, what I find hysterical fact that, right around the time when football season starts, that's when all the male bees get kicked out of the hive, which is pretty fun. And of course, the queen.
Cris?
Yeah.
Can we stay with the drones for 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
Check what I've learned, that the drones actually are so helpless they can't even feed themselves.
No.
And so they tap the antennae of workers to get fed. And so in the fall, the workers start saying no.
Yeah.
And the drones then die. And then I guess the funeral bees carry them out and dump them outside the hive. That's the story?
Yeah. You'll see a pile of, you'll see them scattered outside. I always thought, maybe I'll put a little TV there so they can watch the football. But yeah, you'll walk out. I have mine on the roof, and so you see there's kind of like, you see when it happens, because they'll be there. Anyway, of course, the queen is the fertile female, and will do the awesome task of laying up to 2,000 eggs every day. That's a young queen. The queen lives from anywhere between 3 to 5 years. A lot of beekeepers will replace the queen after a couple of years because the productivity goes down. Kind of sad. The queens have unlike the worker bees, they have a barbless sting. They use it to kill off competing queens, because there can only be one queen in a hive. So they will actually get rid of the ones that compete. And one of the ways that the hive functions is that the queen will produce pheromones that regulate all the hive activities. So that's, if the queen dies or is squished or something like that, and the pheromones go away, the workers will start to raise a new queen. That's why that actually happens. This is the life cycle. You can see how this happens, this is a worker, this is the timing on a worker bee life cycle. Eggs are laid in individual cells. They're fed royal jelly up for the first few days. After that, the workers don't receive royal jelly anymore. The queens will continue to be fed royal jelly, but they'll be in the larval form from day 4 to 7. They'll pupate between day 11 and 20. They will emerge as a new adult around day 21. And as they age, they take on different tasks. Very specifically, of course, this is flexible, you know, but new baby bees that have just emerged will clean out, you know, they do all the janitorial work. They get a little older, they'll help take care of larvae. It's not until they get into the older stages that they'll actually go out of the hive and forage. That's for the eldest bees. And of course, you know, in the summertime, they'll only live 42 days. So another way that the hive reproduces is with swarming. As a superorganism, when the hive gets crowded, if you're not careful, the queen and 50% of the workers will just take off. If you're careful and you can watch this, you can split the hive at that point and get 2 hives out of it. Once they leave, however, the parent colony will be raising a new queen from a queen cell. You can see the special queen cells that they seal off, and you can tell that a queen is being raised. And after that, voila, they've got 2 hives. So they have actually 2 ways to reproduce. One, you know, the individuals, and then of course the super organism itself. It's part of the bees' biology. It's what they do. Anyway, you can see, and if you've ever seen a swarm happen, it's awesome. The air will be filled with a cloud of bees. They'll group in a clump, and they tend not to sting much when they do this. We caught a swarm once, and you know, you just lop off the branch, put it in a box, and stick it in a hive, which is great because then you got 2 hives. Anyway,
I can just add that in the middle of a swarm like that, if you go back to the previous slide, Cris,
yeah,
if you stand right in the middle of that picture to the bottom left,
yeah,
the bees will just buzz all around you. They won't bother you or land on you. They're not at all interested in you. First of all, their stomachs are full of honey. They're just getting ready to go to a new place to set up a new colony. It's really very, I mean, it's terrifying if you've never seen it before, but if you see it, it's really impressive because they just want to form that big ball there with the queen at the center of it, and then move on to a place where they can start a new colony. It's really pretty cool.
yeah, yeah. It's intense. We caught a swarm earlier this year, or in the beginning of May. That was pretty awesome. And you know, notice that the woman here is a picture from what is it? I believe it was 1890. She doesn't even have any protective clothing on, and she doesn't need it because they're not, like Norris says. I mean, they're not going to be interested in, you know, threats. They're interested in finding a new place to live.
At least she has a necktie on.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So if you're thinking about getting into this, you got to ask yourself, is it for you? And so let's think. Are family and friends going to think you're crazy?
Yes.
No. Anyway, let's see. There is a time commitment, and that varies in terms of how many hives you have. At a minimum, the state inspector that I know says you should be checking your hives once between every 7 to 10 days. But of course, that varies. I mean, in the middle of the dearth, you know, do you really want to check your bees every 2 weeks? Nah, you know, you can probably lay off a little bit. And of course, in the winter, you can't check. So the time commitment does vary throughout the year. Financial commitment can also vary. I think that to set up a hive and get all the stuff in the very beginning, just for starters, is going to run you about $500. Would you say that's true, Norris?
I think that's a pretty fair figure. You've got to consider the materials that you need, the boxes, the protective wear, and then you've got to consider the bees as well. And
Yeah.
the bees usually will cost between $125 and $200.
Unless you can catch a swarm.
What's that?
Unless you can catch a swarm.
Unless you catch a swarm, right?
Yeah, right. You know. And there are people who spend lots and lots and lots of money on all sorts of things. So, you know, the sky is kind of the limit on this. Actually, Harvey's Honey, and I love this place. It has a starter hive for $155.25. So you can get the, you know, a basic setup for, you know, pretty cheap. Anyway, let's see. You can become an educator and an advocate for honeybees and pollinators. That's always fun. Everyone will want your honey. This is true. Do you find this is true? Do people ask you for honey all the time, Norris?
Yes, that is true.
Yeah. You may develop full-blown bee fever. People fall in love, they get obsessed. But you will get stung. You just will. I think I've been stung 30 times so far this year. I don't know, it's kind of a lot. I had one hive that was kind of aggressive. Anyway, one time right in my eye. Oh God. Anyway, one thing you really need to worry about and be careful about in this area, and pretty much everywhere now. Since honeybees are considered livestock and hives need to be registered with the Department of Agriculture, they need to keep tabs on bee diseases because they can spread and they can really affect other people's hives. So they will send out an inspector to check out your hives, at least once. And you wouldn't want your pet to be infested with fleas or diseases. To be responsible, you've got to keep tabs on various diseases. And the big one right now for folks in beekeeping is the varroa mite. It's a scourge, and there's tons and tons and tons of way to control it, but you've got to stay on top of it. You can think you might get lucky, but you're going to get them and you're going to have to deal with them. Whether or not you use natural methods, we tend to like to use integrated pest management protocols to take care of varroa mites. Some people go treatment free and use brood breaks. And there's a lot of different thoughts on how to control varroa. And there's plenty of information out there, but I thought I'd bring that up. A lot has been made about saving the bees. And so we have to ask ourselves, are bees in trouble? And technically, no. There are actually more honeybee colonies today than when neonicotinoids were introduced in the 1990s. Colony collapse disorder did get pretty bad, and we're seeing, you know, up to 40% losses among beekeepers' hives, but there are actually more hives now. So honeybees are actually kind of doing okay, and this is a long and intense debate. The big problem is that native bees, insects in general, they're in trouble. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is what they eat has been devastated. Honeybees and pollinators don't do well in industrial agricultural lands or suburbs where there are lawns. There's nothing for them to eat with a lawn. So if you want to actually help bees, if you want to be an environmental steward for pollinators, you best plant pollinator gardens that provide source and big trees like this silver linden you're looking at there, that are going to provide nectar and pollen. There's also an argument for saying, you want to fight imprudent, indiscriminate, and irresponsible use of pesticides because it will affect honeybees, of course, and also lots and lots of pollinators. So if, one thing to ask yourself, if you're getting into, keeping a beehive to quote, save the bees, beekeeping is a great thing to do. But if you really want to save the bees, plant a tree. Anyway.
Add to that about the trees. If you look
yeah.
at that tree on the previous slide, I think that's a linden tree.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure, but you think that in your backyard, you're going to plant a pollinator garden and make the lives of honeybees much better. Well, how many flowers would you have to plant to have as much nectar as this tree produces on its 20 million flowers over the tree? That's where all my, basically my honey and the honey from people in the city of Philadelphia comes from Fairmount Park and all the great trees that we have around here, which basically first in the year are the maple trees, followed by the black locust, followed by tulip poplar, and then these basswood or linden trees. And those are the ones that really produce the greatest volumes of honey. So trees are the best things by far, which is why I never have to worry since I live right next to the park.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's like that'll provide the tree like that is like at least an acre of pollinator garden. So like I said, I mean, plant a tree. If you're gonna get into raising bees, this is just an overview of the most basic what you need. I'm not going to go through all the different kinds of hives. There are many different kinds of hives you can have. The most common and probably the easiest for a beginner beekeeper is the Langstroth. It's good for honey production. Actually, I should say this is that the guild was actually founded in kind of in honor of the anniversary of Langstroth's birth. He was here in Philadelphia and devised this method of beekeeping with movable frames. And what that does is that you can, reason why it's good for honey production, you can take the frame out and take the honey and not destroy the hive. Before that, they used skeps, and beekeepers had to destroy the hive to actually get the honey. In this way, they could both, take the honey and inspect for diseases. It's easily expandable, it's interchangeable. The problem I have with it is that, you get a medium honey super and it gets up to 60 pounds and you have to deadlift it. And it's kind of a problem. It can be heavier than that when it's full of honey. When you do take the hive apart, it can be somewhat disruptive, but all in all, it's probably the easiest way to do it. And you're going to have these frames. See, these frames will fill up with honey. You see that there can be frames without foundation, with foundation, and that's where the bees will build the comb in which they put all the functions of their lives. They store the honey, they store the nectar, they make the honey, they raise the babies. You see the things there. If you've got the hives in a frame like this, it's very orderly, organized. You can control it. If you don't use the frames, you may get something like this. Where they will build in those natural forms, which are actually really beautiful, but not very efficient when it comes to having having humans extract the resources. Anyway, you'll also need the basic protection, the honey veil. I know more experienced beekeepers can get away with using just a veil and no gloves. I'm not that person. I like to have the protection because I like to be able to relax and not think about getting stung. You will need a smoker. It helps. That happens is the bees think the hive's on fire, so that they'll eat honey, they'll get full, and they won't sting you. And you see right here, here is a hive tool, and those are the basics. That helps you, manipulate the hive elements. Some people wear gloves, some people don't. I like to wear nitrile gloves. And if you go into a bee catalog, you'll see there are tons and tons of things you can buy, but these are the basics that you'll need. Let's see. You may want to figure out, excuse me, where can you put your hives? Mine are on my roof, kind of like what you see here. But basically the location should be sunny and it shouldn't get too wet. It helps if it's out of, the biggest gales of wind and weather. Oh, I should probably say this. It's really good if you can arrange it so that the morning sun hits the bees. It just helps them get going. Shaded in the middle of the day is actually ideal, but you can't always do that. It helps if they're out of plain sight. A lot of time I had hives on my roof, and I don't think my neighbors even knew that I had bees at all. I had to go, tell them. Um, you would need some room to maneuver around. You know, you don't want them right up close to each other because you're going to have to lift the boxes off. Anyway, and you're going to want to keep the flight path clear. See that entrance right there? You don't want to stand in front of that because the bees are going to be going in and out. Boom, 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 boom. You stand in that way and they will hit you, and they, you know, you're far more likely to get stung. Anyway, and when it comes to getting bees, there's a lot of ways to actually get them. You can buy them, you can catch them, you can beg them off of somebody. But the guild actually has a list of places you can get bees. And we try to keep up with it. I think I posted it in the newsletter. We haven't updated the website, but if you join the guild, we send out a newsletter and we'll post lists of where to actually get bees when the season's, you know, when the season starts up next spring. You can buy packages starting in April, sometimes a little earlier, usually in the beginning of April. You know, I think I got a split at one point from a friend of mine. So there are different ways you can get bees. Final thoughts, you know, you can ask yourself before you even start. I mean, what are your motivations? Why do you want to be a beekeeper? It's not really necessary. I mean, you're going to find out a lot just in the learning process, but it helps to kind of have a direction to know where you're going. You know, what works for everybody else might not work for you. There's a, you know, that the bee inspector that I know said, you know, you ask, when it comes down to a problem, there are going to be 90 million ways to deal with a particular problem. You ask a beekeeper and you're going to ask 11 beekeepers, you're going to have 10 different, you know, explanations for something. But, you know, what are your goals going to be? Are you going to, do you want to make products? Do you want to learn about nature? Do you want to benefit your community with pollination? I mean, one of the reasons I got is I wanted to raise apple trees and I wanted to make sure there was enough pollination. How much do you want to invest? How much time can you spend? So it helps. You know, what do you want to do with it? Where do you want to go? Anyway, and one thing I wanted to say, like Mike said, Honeyfest is starting up, and if you visit our website, and we have a website and a Honeyfest website. Let's see, there are tomorrow at 5 p.m. we're going to have a live honey tasting stream from Glenford on the Delaware. We have, you know, a lot of different kinds of honeys from people all over Philadelphia, and we're going to be taste testing them for you live, and you'll be able to buy the honey online. And there are other events throughout the month, and you can see some of the events there. Also, recordings will be posted online, so you can watch what has gone before. Let's see. And so to visit Honeyfest online, here are some of the links, and I can, you know, this will be in the recording, so you can check where to go.
Cris, we're getting lots of questions already, so we
okay.
love to get to them.
That's it.
This is great. You sure?
Yeah.
This is amazing. What a great overview.
Other stuff. There are resources on the website, but you know, you guys can find them on the website. But right. There we go. Yeah.
So if you'll unshare, there you go. That was wonderful. What a great introduction to bees. Thank you so much. So people are discovering the chat, and you can go right into it. And I'm gonna I'll try to take them mostly in order. Actually, I just want to stay with the swarm for a second. And this is for you or Norris. So you got this swarm, and the old queen goes with the swarm, right?
Yeah.
How do the other workers decide if they're staying or going? Half the colony divides in half. I'm BA. How do I know which half I'm supposed to be in?
I don't know. Maybe they draw lots. I
think it's usually the older bees who go with the old queen. There will be baby bees in the hive that need to be taken care of by the younger worker bees. And they'll also need to raise the new queen inside the hive. And I saw there was a question about how do the bees decide which of the girls is going to become the queen?
Yeah.
nobody really knows that, except what will happen is the queen, when they decide they're going to swarm, they will tell the old queen to stop laying eggs for about a week or 10 days. And then somehow or other, the worker bees in the hive will decide which 6 or so of the eggs that she has already laid, they're going to turn into new queen bees. And so they will build a special wax cell around those eggs, and then feed, when the eggs hatch into little larvae, they feed that larva royal jelly, and as it grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, so there will be 6 or 8 new queens that are formed. And what happens is those queens will emerge from the cell, but actually two days before they're going to come out of the cell and become live queens, the old queen, the worker bees will tell the old queen, okay, it's time to go, girl. And they'll all fly out of the hive and swarm. And then of those queen cells that are still in the hive that haven't hatched out yet, the first one that emerges will go around and sting all the other ones inside their cell and kill them, so that she's the only one who's there. So there's no, how they decide which eggs to pick, I have no idea. You'd have to ask a bee.
Right. That's crazy. So the queen's first act is murder, essentially.
Yes.
That's great. So let me start taking questions from chat, and thank you all. There's more coming. Laura's wondering if the spotted lanternfly infestation is a danger to bees.
Actually, no, it's a blessing for bees, because the spotted lanternfly is sort of like aphids. They suck the juice out of trees and they poop out this stuff that's basically sugar syrup. And the bees will go around and they'll lap it up and they'll take it back to the hive and turn it into honey. So that's what the spotted lanternflies do. I don't think they have any adverse effect on bees. They may flavor your honey in the fall.
I'm not so sure about lanternfly honey myself. I don't know.
I'm not sure I want to try lanternfly poop honey, but anyway.
Yeah.
How much money does one hive make per year?
Oh,
Also, how much money could you make off of selling honey from one hive per year?
oh goodness, there's a big differential there. Norris, what do you think? I mean, how much have you?
I can give you a rough idea. I will just tell you that I sell my honey for $27 a quart. And in a box of honey frames, I will get about 9 or 10 quarts of honey out of that box. So that's $270 of honey out of one box that has honeycomb in it. And it depends, if you sell it at smaller volumes, obviously you can make more money. If you sell it at bigger volumes, it's less, per ounce.
Yeah. Like conservatively, I think I'm going to get 40 pounds a hive. I'm going to get 2 hives. So that's 80 pounds. And if I sell it for what, $10 a pound, which is cheap for local, raw, organic honey, you do the math, it's, excuse me. You could also make other stuff with it. You can make stuff with the wax.
Right.
You can make, cosmetics.
There's actually an environmental artist who takes these interesting small objects and puts them in beehives, and the bees coat them with wax and takes them out, and that becomes her art. Essentially, the bees
I've seen it. Yeah, it's beautiful.
They're really remarkable.
Fun.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Laura one says that vegans do not eat honey. Should I feel guilty for eating honey? Does the honey does taking the honey harm the bees?
That's an interesting, I know that.
Vegans don't use honey because it's an animal product, essentially.
Right. It's interesting. There are 2 camps on that, actually. Some vegans will not eat honey, and some vegans justify it by saying, well, basically, the bees drink the nectar, they go back to the hive, they and disgorge it into the cells,
Mm.
and then dry it out, and that makes honey. So technically, is that an animal product? They're just moving the nectar from one place to another. So there's some clever vegans who found a way around that. But I'm not passing judgment. It's open for debate.
It doesn't harm the hive because you're keeping the bees alive, essentially.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't kill the bees. You don't want to kill the bees.
But essentially, the purpose of honey, from the bee's point of view, is to make food to last through the winter, especially. That's its fuel to get through the winter.
Right. Exactly. Well, a good beekeeper is going to leave enough honey for them to get through the winter. I mean,
right.
You know, and if I know there's I've heard of a couple of people who, rather than, they'll take all the honey and then just feed the bees sugar throughout the winter, which I think is really awful.
Right.
But, I will be judgmental about that one.
The inner 8-year-old boy in me wants to comment on lanternfly poop being eaten by the the honeybee, which is then vomited into a cell to turn into honey. Yeah. So you've got both poop and vomit in one sentence.
Right.
And it's so tasty.
Oh man.
Beth wants to know, how much honey can one bee make in its lifetime?
Oh, I don't. Wow. What do you think, Norris? Where's Norris?
I don't know. Calculations have been done on this. You can look it up online. It's like maybe 1 teaspoon of honey, I think, for one bee. They also can tell you how much honey a bee produces from every ounce of nectar that it sucks up. The thing to remember is that nectar from plants basically is between 6 and maybe 10% sugar, and it is all sugar. It's sucrose, just like you get from sugar cane. And they take it back to the hive and they turn it into honey, which is they convert the sucrose into glucose and fructose by splitting that 12 carbon sugar into 2 6 carbon sugars. And they evaporate it so that the honey, instead of being 6% sugars, is now 82% sugar, 82 to 85% sugars in honey. So there's only 15% water in honey, whereas there's like 95% water in nectar. So what they do is they bring it to the hive, put the nectar inside a honeycomb cell, flap their wings and blow air over it and evaporate all the water until it gets down to exactly the right consistency. And then they put a wax cap over the top. That's how they do it. Pretty cool.
And this stuff is amazingly like antibacterial, and apparently it lasts like forever. There's a legend that they found honey in like with mummies, and it was still edible. Is that?
Yeah.
That's not true. A legend.
Yes.
Yeah, they use it in burn wards because it's it's so antiseptic that you can cover a burn with it and it won't get infected.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Marina wants to know, is it foolish to think you can pursue being a beekeeper if you are allergic to bee stings?
Oh, we have a story. There's a woman who is an invaluable and inveterate member of the Bee Guild, and she's allergic. But she was very dedicated to doing this, and she decided she still wanted to keep bees, and so she'd go out fully suited up. And for a while she stopped because she'd have to carry an EpiPen. But she went to an allergist and got shots, and finally, got control of the allergy enough so that she felt better about doing it. So it's possible, risky, but possible. I'd suggest, having an EpiPen on hand in case something happens. She's got, the full suit with everything, but yeah, I'd talk to an allergist though first, really.
Ken wants to know, what do you check for when you inspect the hives for every 7 to 10 days? What are you looking for?
Well,
the bees are alive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I tend to think that's a little often. I mean, it's good in the beginning of the season. You want to check and make sure you've got a queen that's laying. You want to check the progress of the brood to make sure that it's progressing well. I mean, what do you think, Norris? Do you think that's too often?
I think at the beginning, probably every week is you know, for the first month maybe to see how they're doing. What you want to see is, are there eggs at the bottom of the honeycomb cells? You want to see if there are little larvae there. You want to see if they get bigger, and you want to see whether the larvae have been capped over to enter into the pupa stage. You also want to look for whether they've stored any honey and whether
Yeah.
they've stored any pollen and whether they're building new honeycomb, because the bees cannot lay, the queen can't lay eggs unless she has a honeycomb cell to lay it in. So the bees have to be doing all of that when you're starting out with a new. The older hives, they've already have honeycomb in there, so they can basically start right away laying eggs and taking care of their babies.
Yeah,
That's what
you've
I
got to
found.
make sure. Yeah, you've got to make sure there's room. And if you see a queen cell or signs that they may be about to swarm, you can try and see if you can interrupt the process at the right time and split, so that rather than have them swarm off into the ozone, you'll be able to take the old queen and put her in a new hive, so that it'll be like an artificial swarm, and you'll have the hive, you know. So that if you stay on top of that, hey, you know.
So just watching the clock, everybody. It's almost 8 o'clock. There's a lot more questions. So we're going to go like to 8:10, 8:15.
Okay.
And I appreciate all the questions. Mike wants to know if you have guidance or tips to broach this topic or negotiate with neighbors. Might want to check your ordinances first, right, to make sure.
Yeah.
First of all, you want to make sure that it's okay in the place that you live. Secondly, you want to look and see where the bees are potentially going to be in your neighbor's space. The favorite place for bees to go, I will tell you, is swimming pools. They somehow like the fact that there's chlorine in the pool and that people pee in the pool. That makes the bees want to go to swimming pools. So if your neighbor has a swimming pool, I promise you the bees are going to go there. The best way to approach that, in my experience, is to talk to your neighbors about starting bees and then offer them honey once you get it. If you usually you can bribe them pretty well with honey. The other thing is, if you have people who are coming into your yard where you have bees, like next door to me, there's a school that sends their kids over in my yard pretty regularly. You have to be sure that you have an EpiPen, because if not, you're exposing yourself to tremendous liability. If some little kid gets stung and dies on your property, well, you're in deep doo-doo there. So it's also good to have an EpiPen, even if you're not allergic, because I read in the Bee Culture magazine about 5 years ago that there was some guy who wrote in, he'd been keeping bees for 55 years, had been stung 100 times over the last 55 years. And this last spring, he got stung and he had an anaphylactic reaction. So just because you've been stung 100 times before doesn't mean that you're not going to be allergic the next time.
Wow.
Okay. Ken wants to know what conditions is apitherapy used for? I guess you get purposely stung? Is that what
Yeah.
apitherapy is?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's good for arthritis. And my first mentor in beekeeping in Philadelphia was a guy named Tony Buzzas, believe it or not. And he said that he had gotten started in beekeeping when he was in his 20s because somebody told him that apitherapy was a good thing to have. He had terrible pain in his neck, so he got a couple of stings, and after that his neck pain totally went away. So he went into not just beekeeping, but professional beekeeping, and I think had about 1,000 hives he ran up and down to Florida. So it does work, believe it or not. I don't have arthritis, so I can't tell you that it makes any difference.
Wow. Grace asks, do you need to pasteurize your honey?
Actually, if you heat it up, it destroys some of the enzymes, so you want to keep it raw. It's a natural antiseptic, so you don't need to pasteurize it.
Well, no germs grow in it anyway because the
Yeah.
sugar content is so high. That's why it works on wounds, because it basically sucks all the water out of bacteria.
Is it sometimes strained to get like bug parts out of it and things
Oh,
like that?
yeah.
Well, usually when we extract the honey, we put it you can either crush up the honeycomb, put it in a strainer, or you can spin it in a machine. And there are always little pieces of wax that come out, and those you put it through a strainer, and into a bucket, and that's how you get the honey that's free of wax.
And bugs.
And bugs. Kathy asked a question that goes back to the beginning. What was the researchers' theory as to why beekeepers never developed COVID? How could they control for so many variables in the research?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Norris, any thoughts on that?
It's magic. That's all I can say.
So presumably there's something in the bee's sting that
Have they done studies?
is
I can't imagine or even theorize what it is about being a beekeeper that makes you resistant, but apparently that's what they discovered in Wuhan.
interesting. James reminds us that many honeys have the source on the jar label.
A good thing.
So it'll tell you whether it's lanternfly or not.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's single source honey it's kind of difficult in Philadelphia because, you know, bees will forage 5 miles and you don't know what they're getting into. So
Nandia wants to point out that it's definitely an
Yeah.
animal product
Good.
with
Yeah.
exclamation. Okay.
Regarding honey source, if you put your beehive in the center of a 20-acre clover field, you can say that you have clover honey.
yeah.
If you put it in the swamps in Florida where they grow tupelo trees, you can say it's tupelo honey. The acid test really, though, is doing a pollen analysis of the honey. And if there's more than 80% of one particular flower or tree, you can say that it's that variety of honey. But most of it around in Philadelphia is what we would call wildflower honey, which is a mixture of everything that's out there growing.
Right. But bees tend to have a fidelity to whatever is blossoming. So if there's something in flower, the bee will dance and tell the other workers to go, this is it. And so suddenly you'll get a lot of clover, for example, because they're all working it based on
Yeah.
that.
One story. I mean, my bees are on my roof, and there's a yellowwood tree right there, and it's really great honey. And I remember they all were feeding off this big yellowwood tree, and I got the honey right after that, and it was just this really nice, light, clean, clear yellowwood honey. So you can sort of time it so you get some honey that's, you know, sort of single source, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
I'm looking down and saying blueberry blossom, for example. Blueberry honey is you see that in New Jersey because they have big fields of blueberries, and so you can pretty much be sure that it's going to be blueberry honey. But they don't choose, you know, they're not going to say, well, you know, I'm just going to go to blueberries. It's the placement of the hive.
So the hive is placed in the middle of a giant blueberry field and at the right time when the flowers are out. Yeah. Do more aggressive bees, this is from Suzanne and Steve, aggressive bees ever push out standard honeybees in the Northeast?
You know, Norris, do you know about, have you heard of anything like that? Or
No, I think what I've noticed in this area is that sometimes people will get a very aggressive hive,
yeah.
but that's usually the exception, and it sometimes depends on the day, the time of day, what the weather's like. I don't think I've ever had any really aggressive hives. I do notice that sometimes bees are particularly aggressive to certain people. I think it's probably because of the way they smell. My brother is one person like that. I have a son who's the similar way. They get within 15 feet of the hive and the bees will come out and sting them. I can stand right in front of the hive, like 6 inches away, and the bees will not bother me at all. So I think it basically depends on how you smell.
So
Well,
your son is not going to go in your family trade, it looks like.
No, definitely not.
a couple of things with that. Some breeders will tend to breed selectively for less aggressive bees. You can do that, but it is still good to, you know, take a shower without any kind of scented soaps or anything like that. Don't use scented shampoo or something, because that can set them off.
William asked a great question. What trees are good to plant?
Well,
We had that linden photograph, for example.
yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one because the silver linden will bloom in July when other plants aren't, you know, when there aren't that many other plants blooming. If you go on our website and you look at under, resources, and you'll see bees and trees. And there's a brochure that charts what what trees are blooming when and how good they are. Actually, there's a pretty good chart on Wikipedia too that actually goes through all different kinds of trees. I've tried to put a bloom report in our newsletter to tell people, you know, what is blooming, you know, what can you expect, you know, tell me what you see blooming so we can kind of keep track. So yeah, I couldn't list them all right now, but you know, if you go online, you'll see the list. That's what I'd suggest.
My neighbor has a Carolina silverbell
Oh,
tree, and when you walk under it during the right time, the tree buzzes. You can actually hear the buzzing.
oh, cool.
It's really cool. How do you harvest the honey? Asked our friend from upstate New York
Wow.
with the great sunset.
Norris, you've been harvesting a lot of honey, right?
This year, so far this year in July, at the end of July, I got, I think, 600 pounds of honey. And I expect in October to get at least that much, if not more, from the same hives.
Wow.
What you do is you take those frames of honeycomb out of the hive and you take a sharp knife and cut off the top of the honeycomb. Then what I do is I put that frame inside a centrifuge machine that spins around really fast for a long time. I used to crank it, now I have an electric motor. And all the honey flies out of the honeycomb, collects in the bottom of the extractor bucket, and you run it out through a honey gate, through a strainer into a big bucket and save it there, and then you can put it into bottles or however, whatever else you want to do with it. That's the way most of it's extracted. The other way you can extract it is you just scrape off the honeycomb, mash it up, put it in a paint strainer bag and let it drip for a couple of days. And about 95% of the honey will drip out, and then you can take the wax and melt it down and get extra honey out of that and use the wax for whatever you want to use it for. It's pretty easy to extract honey, but it's an effort because you have to lift up those heavy boxes and move them from one place to another.
Great. What does a yearly or seasonal timeline look for a beekeeper look like for a beekeeper in terms of tasks? So what's a yearly seasonal timeline?
Well, let's see. You can't open the hive in the wintertime because it's gonna, if it's under what 50 some degrees, you don't want to be looking in there. It's gonna chill the cluster and might kill off the brood. You don't want to do that. When it starts to warm up, you might want to check and see if they need food. You might be able to, on a warm day in the winter, you might be able to crack it to see if they need any food, just to make sure they haven't gone through all their honey and they're not going to starve. But when the spring comes and it starts to warm up, you can start taking little peeks. So, you know, in the wintertime, you're not going to get a huge expenditure of time. In the spring, when the season starts, you're going to start needing to spend some more time. If you're just starting out and you install the bees, you know, in the beginning of April, like Norris said, you're going to want to do it every 7 to 10 days, you know, just to keep tabs on everything that's going. Once there's a period in the summer where there's what's called a dearth, and they tend to get really, what's the word? Testy. They get kind of testy during the dearth, and sometimes, you know, I lay back during that time and don't check on them that often. Norris does 2 extractions a year. That's going to take some hours. So, you know, it tends to vary, like I said, during the timelines. But I think on average throughout the year, you're going to be spending, you know, I'd say the average is about an hour a week, but it's going to be very variable about how much really happens. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that, Norris?
Yeah, I think in addition to checking for the things I mentioned before, like
Yeah.
eggs, babies, and brood, and wax and honey and all that stuff, one of the things that you absolutely have to do around here if you want to have a surviving beehive is you have to at least treat them for these mites. And ideally, you also want to check how many mites there are in each hive by there are 2 special tests that we do, either shaking them with sugar, or that is powdered sugar, or else doing an alcohol wash. And those are things we can get into if you really want to do serious beekeeping. But you need to check for mites and you need to treat for mites every year. Otherwise, your bees will die in the spring, guaranteed, pretty much.
Mm.
So you've got the spring check to see how they're doing, whether they're laying eggs, whether they're producing honey. You've got your harvest in the middle of the summer, then again, maybe in the fall if they've refilled the hives, and then treat for mites at least a couple of times, if not more than that, during the year. In the wintertime, if you've taken away a lot of honey, you really need to feed the bees, and you feed them sugar syrup. And there are lots of different ways to do that. Again, if people are really interested in that, we can talk about that in
Well,
another
if it's
setting.
cold enough, you need to do fondant, you know, I mean, candy.
Yeah, there are lots of
Or-
different ways to
yeah.
feed them, but it's
Yeah.
not
Right.
just a thing that you need to think about right at the very beginning.
No.
Okay, so it's 8:11. We're going to go to about 8:15. So we'll do we'll try to get through the questions. So maybe we can do this like a lightning round, and try to get through the rest of our questions. Alika asks, is it true that bee allergies arise because of an accumulation of bee stings? Is that
What
the
do you
like?
think about that, Norris?
Go ahead.
I don't think so. I think you're either just unlucky. Nobody really knows how it develops. I mean, some people are just born with an allergy to it. Um, and I had a grandson who got stung when he was really young. Then he was about 6 years later, he got stung again, and he had a definite anaphylactic reaction. Most people feel that if you get stung a lot, it kind of desensitizes you to the sting, so you're not going to get allergic to it. But as I mentioned before, there's a guy who'd been stung hundreds of times over 50 years and still developed a reaction at some point. So there's no way to predict it.
Right. Kathy asks, is medicinal honey different than the honey used for consumption? Is there a medicinal honey?
There's a famous Manuka honey that comes from New Zealand,
Right.
which comes from a Manuka tree, and that has some things in it which I think have a special antibacterial action. But there are things in just regular, ordinary honey that have antibacterial action to them, and that's a subject that's for a more detailed discussion about what exactly it is in honey that fights against bacterial infections, and I could do that offline too.
Great. And then Dave put, for everybody in chat, Dave put a great list of trees.
Yeah, they're good ones.
Yeah. Linden, magnolia, chokecherry, redbud, crabapple, serviceberry, black gum, which is tupelo. Great. We have someone lives near the Pittsburgh area and would like hands-on mentoring. Is there something like that out there? Is there a guild out in the Pittsburgh area?
You know, I don't know if there's a guild out there. I check online to see if there's a local club. Or they're usually organized by county. So I just check online. I'm afraid I don't know if there's a Western Pennsylvania or a number of Western Pennsylvania groups organized.
Right.
Do you know of any, Norris?
No, I would go to the Pennsylvania State Beekeepers
Oh, yeah,
Association website and look, and they're the resource, really.
And there's lots of environmental centers in Western Pennsylvania. They might know who the people are. Penn State Extension might know, even possibly.
Oh, probably. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they've got a lot of great stuff on their website for this.
Ken asks, what do the bees use to make the comb? Because they have to make the wax too somehow.
Well, the comb is the wax.
Right.
They'll, I forget the composition of wax. They'll pollen is part of the protein and some of the fats that will combine to create the wax, but I'm not sure of exactly the composition. It's kind of interesting. If you go online, you see pictures of the wax flakes being, that are coming out of their bodies. They'll actually generate this wax and then form it into the beautiful shapes. But do you know any more about the composition of the wax?
Yeah, for those of you who are biochemists and took organic chemistry, the bees take honey, which is a carbohydrate, and they turn it into wax, which is a hydrocarbon. So they get rid of the water in the wax and they turn it into just carbon and hydrogen. They do that in these special cells in their stomach, and they excrete it through the flaps of their belly.
Through the flaps of their belly.
Yes, if you look how they have rings, it looks like they have rings around them.
Right.
And in between those are where these glands are, and they kind of produce the wax there and squeeze it out in
A-
flakes.
And is wax making one of the jobs when you're in the bee, or do all bees do it?
They
All the
all
workers
do
do
it
it?
at some point in their life. Yes.
Right.
There's a
Wow.
certain age range at which they're tasked with building the comb.
Right.
Um, I have a chart that kind of charts how
Right.
what the age is, the day range.
That's great. Actually, here's the last question because the rest are thank yous, and thank you for all the thank yous. Appreciate it. And this is from Alika, and my apologies if I'm not saying your name right. How do you treat for the mites? So the varroa mites, what do you have to do for them?
Well, there's a range. Like I said, I mean, there's a range of treatments that you can do, and I have a really good chart, and there's charts online that says what treatments work when, because you want to make sure there's some treatments you can't use when there's a honey super on because it'll affect the honey. There's some treatments you can't use when it's too cold. There's some treatments you can't use when it's too hot because it'll kill the bees. It's a difficult thing. You're trying to kill one insect without killing another.
Right.
So, and then there are other non-chemical methods, and there are dozens of them, and you have to time them so that preferably use different methods of killing the mites during the year so that the mites don't develop the resistance to it. So because if you keep using the same thing over and over and over again, they're going to develop a resistance to it, and it's a problem.
Well, there are toxic pesticide chemicals that we used when these things first came out.
Yeah.
And then it sort of moved into using organic chemicals, particularly formic acid and oxalic acid, which are the favorites nowadays. For those of you who are really organic, there is a hop extract that you can use that works pretty well for mites as well. So for beer drinkers and hop lovers, Hop Guard is the thing.
So Norris, would you leave us with something inspirational about bees that you love about them?
What I like about bees is that they're a way to really excite and energize kids. And I have a couple of mentees I've worked with in beekeeping who are very excited about beekeeping. And the bottom line is, once you give one of these kids a taste of the honey that's coming out of the extractor machine, believe me, they are hooked for life.
That's great. And Cris, Larson, any parting thoughts you want to give for us about bees?
I don't know. I just hope that people can, if you're thinking of getting into it, one of the great joys that I have is just to be able to observe, the incredibly fascinating workings and kind of like, I guess, the genius of the superorganism that works so well. Plus, it's a great way to reach out to other people.
Cris, Humanities is your work. There's so many good bee books. Do you have one special that you want to recommend to people to read? There's so many, and they come out all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Walk into any bookstore, there's just great bee books.
Oh
My
my
favorite is Winnie the Pooh.
Very good.
A lot of people will say, I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, do you want a
Yeah.
how-to book? Do you want a philosophy book? Do you want a
Right.
queen raising book? There's so many.
There's so many.
As exactly what you said. I mean, a lot of people would say Honeybee Democracy by Tom Seeley if you just want inspiration.
There we go. Good. All right.
That's a good one. Yes.
Good. So Norris and Cris from the Philadelphia Beekeepers Guild, thank you so much for being here. Good luck with your honey festival. Everybody go to visit their honey festival this weekend. Hope you can. I want to thank Amanda for being our co-pilot tonight. She put in the chat section the link to our talk next week with Deanne Reeder, the Bucknell researcher working on bats and COVID. And we'll keep the COVID conversation going next week as well. And then the week after is the environmental art installation exhibition. Ecotactics will be opening the show virtually here on Zoom. So thank you all for coming in tonight. Again, thank you, Cris. Thank you, Norris.
Thanks
Thank you for the invitation.
You got it. Our pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Have a great night. Everybody stay safe.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Cris. That was wonderful. Really appreciate it.
I'm
Norris,
sorry if it was a little long, but
not at all. No, it was perfect. It was just really wonderful. Thank you. Have a great night.
you too.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda. Bye.
Oop, I realized I'm muted. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Cris and Norris. That was great.
Thank you. Glad you got back in.
Yes. Thanks.